King of the Hill Season 14 followed up its very strong but stuffed repilot with a smart story decision, a Hank and Bobby episode. Going into the season, this was the one that I was maybe most looking forward to. Beer opinions just provide a lot of potential for both generational divide and father-son connection. And I'm happy to say that to that end, it delivered, and in ways I didn't really expect. A really great father-son story that primarily showcases just how similar Hank and Bobby actually are, despite their opinionated differences. This also has one of my favorite subplots in the entire season, and it really latches onto those same themes perfectly, so let's dive into it. And hey, if you like this breakdown, not only will I be releasing one for every single episode of the season over the next couple of weeks, but over on my Patreon, I'll be posting my uncut reaction videos to my first time watching each episode. If that piques your interest, basically when I post the new episode breakdown on this channel, I'll simultaneously post my reaction video to that episode on my Patreon. Check it out if you're interested, and thanks for the support. So obviously one of the most important aspects of King of the Hill has always been Hank and Bobby's struggle to connect. A more repressed and traditional man who has a hard time understanding his more hard-on-his-sleeve type son. And so many of the best episodes of the show are them finding common ground despite their generational divide. But often that comes through Hank or Bobby coming around on something they previously didn't quite understand, discovering some kind of value or integrity in something that they had rejected that the other person had embraced. But now that Bobby is a young adult, the revival does something really smart. They focus an episode on a subject that both Hank and Bobby have interest in, but that they both approach from very different perspectives because of that aforementioned generational divide. And that interest is beer. Yes, one of Hank's special interests is beer, and of course propane. The episode opens with Hank waking up super early despite being retired and not really knowing what to do with his time. Essentially, this is the new hook for Hank in this entire revival season.
The thing they don't tell you about retirement is there's so much time to fill.
The way Hank starts spending his day features some pretty great gags that bring modern updates to some of the older King of the Hill staples. Hank is watching a reboot/sequel of Monsignor Martinez, and this leads to one of my favorite Peggy Spanish faux pas in maybe the entire series, when she tells Hank that Martinez just said next time he's going to kill their whole family.
Peggy, it's subtitled. He's wishing those orphans Merry Christmas.
There's also our first look inside the modern Megalomart, complete with lazy young employees, which isn't anything new. That was actually pretty standard for the Megalomart throughout the entire original series as well, but I do like the added detail that now not only do they not know where anything is, but the only way they can tell if they even have anything in stock is by looking it up online. It's just a different modern brand of useless. But Hank spots a homebrew kit at Megalomart, which sets the entire episode in motion. Just a great idea that I'm almost surprised they didn't do in the original run ever.
Puts together my two loves, beer and propane.
I think they were also smart to immediately drop an episode that showcases not just that Bobby is an adult now, but showcases his skills and know-how related to his field, and that be a field that Hank has at least some layman's interest in. It's sort of a perfect way to establish more of Bobby's professionalism, but also to challenge Hank, who has to come to terms with the fact that his son might actually know more than he does about something he's interested in. It makes for a great first conflict between Bobby and Hank since he's returned to Arlen. It was also just smart to have an episode where Bobby and Hank's stories fully intertwine after that first revival episode has them pretty separate in establishing the new status quo. I also love that Peggy is the one who tries to push Hank and Bobby together on the beer brewing front. That's always been a major aspect of the original series, Peggy attempting to facilitate Hank and Bobby's connection. I think they handle Bobby's dialogue here really well too. He's obviously so knowledgeable when it comes to beer brewing, but he also comes across as pretty condescending.
My beer has hops.
Yep, it sure does, Dad. All beer has hops.
But I think this really just stems from Bobby really wanting to prove himself to his dad through something that he really is actually good at. But Bobby and Hank obviously have completely different philosophies when it comes to beer, and this is such a great real-world generational conflict to explore. Hank drinks Alamo and only Alamo, and so of course he wants to brew a beer that is like Alamo. But Bobby is obviously more into the craft beer scene and appreciates the variety beer can offer. And he has a distaste for Hank's quote-unquote boring alley beer. I've said this like 4 times, but I think this is a really smart conflict because rather than one of them meeting the other on their playing field, they're meeting in a fully common space, and their friction isn't that they love beer, it's in how they love beer. But the true genius of this episode is that once they go their separate ways and brew their own beers, the episode basically showcases how undeniably alike Bobby and Hank actually are, not in their subjective taste when it comes to beer, but in their commitment to and obsession with the craft, despite the fact that they're using that craft to pursue different outcomes. We get these parallel focus groups where Hank gets the gang's thoughts on his brew, and Bobby gets Joseph, Chain, and Chain's lackey's thoughts on his. And both of them ultimately end up fully succumbing to peer pressure, moving away from their original visions for their beer. I have got to shout out how much I loved this montage showcasing Hank and Bobby's parallel work ethic in beer brewing, set to Runnin' Down a Dream by Tom Petty. Honestly, I hope they spend the money to license more Tom Petty music across the entire revival, as you know, like an ongoing tribute to Tom and to Lucky, of course. One of my favorite details in the montage is that both Hank and Bobby are up late reading about brewing to prepare, and these corresponding shots look so good, but you can see that Bobby is reading The Art of the Brew, and Hank is reading Brew Math, kind of a perfect way to showcase that the pair have the exact same work ethic, but Bobby approaches from a more left-brained perspective, and Hank from a more right-brained one. But I really like the way that this episode doesn't really frame Bobby or Hank as having a better or more correct take. Even though Bobby is clearly more experienced in the brewing field, they're both equally as passionate about their own taste in beer. Bobby and Joseph just aren't fans of more boring classic beers, and Hank thinks that craft beers are doing entirely too much.
Is Cursed Hobbit Stout supposed to taste like medicine?
And this all culminates in a really sweet ending, but before we get to that resolution, let's talk about the subplots in this one. One of which was sort of just a goofy comedic side adventure for Boomhauer, who is sort of lamenting the way the times have changed and reminisces about how he tried his first beer when he was really young thanks to his dad, so he opts to get some non-alcoholic beer for Luke Jr. This whole story is obviously not particularly substantial, but it does have some really funny moments, and it does kind of tie to the themes of the episode. Luke Jr. crushing a near beer on his head was very slapstick, super funny, and I really liked the idea that he was just having his friends over to the alley to drink non-alcoholic beer, just like Hank and the boys do. And I really loved this little moment from when it all wrapped up.
Stop right now, man. I would have cut you off.
No idea what you said, but I just wanted to be cool like you, Boomhauer.
That's pretty sweet. I like Dad Hauer, or Boomfather. It's just nice that even in these fully comedic subplots, the show is aiming for these nice sentimental moments, and it shows Boomhauer in a dynamic we haven't seen much of before. Plus, the way it ties to the themes of the other 2 stories in the episode is pretty cool, and the other subplot might actually be my favorite of the entire season. While working out their brews for the competition, Dale suggests he might be able to eliminate a certain competitor.
Are you suggesting killing Bobby?
He lands on fixing the competition via sabotage, and at the exact same time, Joseph decides to do the same thing for Bobby.
You work on the beer, I'll take care of the rest.
This is really such a tiny part of the episode, but it makes such an impact, showcasing that Joseph is truly Dale's son in the funniest way imaginable. They even make sure to show both of them giving Hank and Bobby these winks alluding to their sabotage plans, like father, like son. And while Dale is scoping out the judge's house, it turns out Joseph is doing the exact same thing. I cannot even explain how much joy it brought me to see Dale and Joseph just sharing a cigarette here.
Did you already look through his garbage for compromat? That's why I couldn't find any compromat.
I really do think this is one of the best things the entire revival has done. Years ago, I made this video about Joseph and his relationship to both Dale and John Redcorn, which was a really interesting subject to explore, particularly as potential father figures. And obviously, the show goes out of its way to showcase that Dale is mostly a really great father to Joseph. That's like the crux of the episode Peggy's Headache, when she discovers the truth about Joseph and considers telling Dale.
Can't watch Encino Man without milk balls, huh?
Thanks, Dad!
But the show does also showcase a lot of instances where Dale's more neurotic tendencies actually led to neglect or put Joseph in danger, and we've even seen John Redcorn step in and help in some cases. I always liked the idea that the show was sort of pushing the nature versus nurture narrative. The whole John Redcorn may be your father, but he's not your daddy type shtick. But outside of just showing that Dale can be a good and loving father, I always felt like the show could have done a better job showcasing Dale's actual total impact on Joseph as a person, to really hammer home those explorations of nature versus nurture. And that's why I think this revival subplot just hits so hard for me. We see that in his young adulthood, despite looking more and more like John Redcorn every day, Joseph is so much like Dale. I mean, this shot of Joseph taking a trash bag out of his pocket and jumping into it, rolling up to hide himself, is maybe the most Pocket Sand-esque thing we've seen in the show outside of Pocket Sand itself. And I love the way this culminates in both of them bailing on the competition in paranoia the moment they see a couple of cops. It's perfect. Like, this is only 2 scenes long, but it went such a long way for me. And this story about Dale and Joseph, alongside the sillier story about Luke Jr. wanting to be more like Boomhauer, ties really brilliantly to Hank and Bobby's story on a thematic level. It's all about the impacts fathers have on their kids and the ways their tendencies can be passed down, even if they have incredibly different tastes or worldviews. I love the way this episode both highlights the intense differences and intense similarities between Hank and Bobby. They are both so unbelievably passionate and unbelievably stubborn about their own tastes. And in this one, both Hank and Bobby learn a lesson, that they should have put their stubborn, overly competitive feelings aside and just allowed each other to have differing opinions about beer.
But the sad part is, it could have been time spent doing something fun with my son, and I didn't give it a chance.
And in an episode where Bobby spends the entire runtime trying to prove himself in the ways that set him apart from his dad, he actually ends up proving himself in the ways that make him a lot like his dad.
Different beer, but the hops fell out of the same tree.
Man, I really love that line, particularly after Bobby gave Hank such a hard time about the hops comment earlier in the episode. And I think maybe best of all, though in the end they do come together, they don't come around on each other's style of beer.
Still boring.
Too fruity.
I think it's pretty refreshing that the resolution here isn't either of them being wrong about how they feel about beer. It's about both of them admitting that they were approaching this whole scenario the wrong way. And like many King of the Hill episodes, about learning what's most important to them. It's not winning a competition to prove that their opinion is the correct one. It's about sharing a beer with your dad or son and bonding over a shared interest. In addition to just having another quality Sentimental King of the Hill resolution, this episode does a lot to sort of build out the new cast of characters and world of the show in ways I loved and others I was maybe a little more middling on. For one, this is a great Peggy episode, even though she's just a supporting player. Obviously, the way she pushes Hank and Bobby together is very important, but her little through line about demanding the beer be called Peggy Ale was very funny.
Wasanasang Ale.
Are you kidding me?
The show has started implementing a few bleeped curses like this throughout the season, obviously a change from the original run, and while I think they mostly do a good job in selecting what characters and scenarios that these work in, I think that this delivery from Peggy in this episode is far and away the funniest one. I also think this season pretty immediately starts Peggy off in a place where she's really firing on all cylinders. She feels like the Peggy we know and love from like seasons 5 through 8. She's maybe a tad flanderized in her overconfident narcissism compared to seasons 1 through 4, but in a way that is incredibly funny and doesn't feel over the top. It could have been really easy to make Peggy feel like even more of a caricature, and I think the revival did a great job with her right off the bat. Something that this episode really highlighted for me was Bobby's lack of a support structure, at least from friends. Obviously, he's got Joseph and has only just reconnected with Connie in the premiere, but his focus group is made up of Chain and Chain's frat boys, and I did mostly just find the frat boys super annoying, though that also maybe seemed to be the point. And I do think that Chain being a bit more of a focused supporting character makes for a really interesting dynamic in the show, particularly given the business partner relationship with Bobby. I think Chain growing into a typical frat bro is a supernatural evolution, but he's definitely not somebody that Bobby would normally spend time with, which makes the friction from the difference in their personalities really shine given that they're more or less forced to be together in a lot of scenarios. I hope that beyond season 14, Chain gets more development and maybe even a more empathetic arc. While he is definitely a huge douche, they do hint at the weight of the expectation he feels because of his father's success, and I think it would be kind of cool to add a bit more nuance to his character. But it also has me hoping that the show opts to maybe add more substantial supporting characters to the Bobby side of the series. I definitely miss some of his funnier classmates from Tom Landry Middle School. And on Hank's side, it was nice to see them get Brian Robertson in the mix when initially trying Hank's beer, but given that he recommended the brewing competition, I feel like this would have been a good opportunity to keep him involved throughout the episode. Maybe get him in on the focus group with the other members of the Alley Gang. He seems like a character with a lot of potential, and I just feel like getting him in the mix a bit more frequently could have gone a long way to make him stand out here. This episode also obviously features some of the earliest and most jarring dialogue for Dale, as it seems as though they used both Johnny Hardwick and Toby Huss for the episode. And honestly, while I do understand that people are bothered by this, I also think that they were really between a rock and a hard place. Obviously, Johnny didn't record enough of the dialogue to fill out the entire episode, but they were also sitting on Hardwick's final performances ever given, in his beloved iconic role. While it's clear Johnny was struggling to find Dale's voice again, and the mix and match dialogue with Toby's new performance makes it feel even more off, I think this was the only real resolution that I would have been okay with. I just would rather they use Johnny's dialogue to honor his legacy than redo the entire episode to make it more consistent. And for me, while he obviously doesn't sound exactly the same, I think Toby's performance really comes alive in the back part of the season when he's not trying to match Johnny within the body of an episode. I think he'll really grow into the role as the show goes on. He's just such a good comedic voice actor, and I'm really eager to see how he grows after he gets a few episodes under his belt. I think the most exciting standout for me in this episode was Joseph. His new voice actor, Ty LeClaire, really doesn't miss a beat in terms of performance, and I think he really helped elevate the slightly more neurotic characterization they're bringing to the young adult version of the character. Overall, I think the progression of this season is just really strong so far. It starts with a sort of pilot 2.0 that sets up our new timeline and where the characters are, and then immediately they tell a Hank and Bobby focused story that not only harkens back to the classic King of the Hill formula, but does so in a way that only this new aged up version of the series could have done. It really highlights why they opted to bring the show back the way that they did. It's a really strong start to season 14. And that is what I've got to say about season 14, episode 2, The Beer Story. Remember, if you liked this breakdown, I've got one for the premiere episode posted already, more for season 14 on the way, uncut reactions to these episodes over on my Patreon, and of course, tons more King of the Hill videos across the entire channel. Check out any of that if you're interested, and stay tuned for more. Peace.
I stay mellow watching Johnny two cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny two cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.